Hello, I am doing a journal entry on chapter 8 of the book Bodylessness. And chapter 8 is on bodylessness and the reclamation of bodily authority. And I'm going to start by reading a sentence from this chapter on page 166. But a consistent practice, well, I'll read two sentences. It can be important to push ourselves like this occasionally, such as walking that last mile down a street, even though our feet hurt in order to get home. But a consistent practice of ignoring our felt experience will set up the habit of ignoring body signals during work and collapsing at the end of work in exhaustion. Okay, I'm going to read three. Instead of an ongoing and satisfying alternation of work, rest, play, we get stuck into a sequence of work, work, collapse. Okay, so I'm going to speak on my experience as a woman who has a menstrual cycle and how I relate to this, and how the rhythm that society paces itself off of, how that influences this. So I'm pretty passionate about the menstrual cycle and about being able to live rhythmically with nature. And society, especially in America, is very much so based off of this circadian rhythm. But I also have a infradian rhythm. That's what I believe it is called, which is basically a rhythm that mirrors the moon, and it's cyclical and it's seasonal. And this sentence that I read on ignoring our felt experience and how that can set up, for this collapse situation, um, it really reminds me of, and I'm just gonna like stick with I statements. I feel like this will probably be very relatable for many people. But yeah, being in a societal rhythm that is based off of the circadian rhythm, um, doesn't allow for the space a lot of times to really feel, the experience of bleeding. And instead, there is a need that I find myself in, um, to ignore certain aspects of this experience to be able to show up for my commitments that pay the bills, that is structured based on the circadian rhythm. So an example, for instance, is my day one. Um, I've had different experiences throughout my life. Certain times in my life, I don't cramp at all, and it's really great, and I love bleeding, and I love bleeding anyway. But yeah, I don't really have a lot of pain, a lot of cramps. Um, and generally these times is when I have a lot more spaciousness in my life. And when I can mm, live based on and the infradian rhythm as well as the circadian rhythm in a really rhythmic and harmonious way. But that's not always the reality. And that's not the reality right now, as I am a college student and kind of, uh, have these commitments to show up to every day or, certain days. Um, and sorry, I'm just like catching my thoughts real quick. Yeah, so for instance, I was making an example on my day one right now, um, as I am a college student, my first day and pretty decent my second day, I have really freaking intense cramps, um, that are like really intense. And the just recently I had my bleed and it was a Wednesday and I have two classes on Wednesdays and I had to call out of both. It was my first time starting my bleed during like one of the school days, but it was so bad, like one of the worst bleeds I've had and or like one of the some of the most pain that I've had with bleeding in a really long time. And kind of like looking back on the my inner cycle, um previous to that, it was more of this like work collapse. I didn't fit in that rest, and I did fit in some play, but like the rest absolutely wasn't there. So by the time my bleed came around, my body was screaming at me because I had been like ignoring this, where my body was like, hey, like slow down, I'm not used to this pace. And I in a way, yeah, I'm just like still learning what that balance is. I'm learning how I can slow down and also like fulfill the amount of investment that I want to make into being a college student. So I definitely like heard my body very loud Wednesday, and I made the choice to call out of my classes and my therapy appointment. Um, my cramps were like really intense. Like I was like laying on my bed, crying in frustration because there was so much pain. And I'm very, uh, I just like, I don't like pharmaceuticals. I don't like over the counter medicines. I'm just like, I'm not with it. And, so yeah, I kind of just like felt through the pain. And I know so like I'm gonna speak on something that I've heard some of my friends and people I know speak on is that, they have these intense cramps. They have no choice but to make it to work. So they take a bunch of ibuprofen or Tylenol or both. Um, and and so that they don't have to feel this pain that their body is giving them and they can ignore it so then they can fulfill their obligations in society. And this is just like something that I'm not willing to compromise. Like, I'm not going to ignore my body to be able to show up somewhere. I can, like, and that might mean a lot of times I show up somewhere and I'm experiencing pain, but this day in specific, this Wednesday, it was so intense that if I like not taking ibuprofen or Tylenol, there was no way I was like leaving my home. It was so intense. Like I took like 5 baths that day or something, just like constantly trying to ease the pain. And yeah, before I made this conscious choice to really honor my body and my rhythms in this way, there was points in my life where I ignored my body I took the ibuprofen and Tylenol. I went to school or went to work or whatever. And yeah, I feel like there's kind of like this is in this sentence like what the disembodiment is, and or not disembodiment, disbodyfulness, and um not disbodyfulness, bodylessness. There we go. Um yeah, and I guess this journal entry is just like this contemplation on how society being very based off of a circadian rhythm and not putting any consideration into making it also a structure of the infraradian rhythm, really puts beings who bleed um, monthly or however the rhythm of their womb is, um, it makes it really hard for them to actually fully be in bodyfulness and show up for these commitments. And I feel like that's a problem. And this is kind of my, making that vow to really honor my body in this way, in a way is like a form of, for me, like how I step into like radical leadership and really like breaking free from the constructs and, conventionality of society and choosing to live a different way, even if that brings consequences to me, um, or to my reality. I'm fine with that, because I believe in this. I believe in the importance, I value the importance of living rhythmically with my body, and um but also I just want to acknowledge that like I have the privilege to be able to step into leadership in this radical way and not face super severe consequences. And I just want to acknowledge, like, also the people who are in experiences that are much less privileged, where they don't have that choice. They absolutely need to show up for work, or else they're not going to be able to pay the bills, or an even worse scenario than that. So I do want to acknowledge that this is coming from, um, yeah, I just want to acknowledge my privilege, and that isn't the reality for everyone. And that kind of brings me to this like next point of like, okay, so other people who are experiencing this, where they absolutely need to show up to something, but their body is absolutely like, fuck no. So they like have to take ibuprofen, or they have to find something to do to be able to leave the house, and to get to a point of ignoring their body. Um, it's like, what can one do then that is in that type of situation? And there is a school called the Red School in the UK, that I've done some trainings with. And one of the tools that they speak on and use and encourage others to use is called the 1% rule. And basically, um, this rule speaks about, um, it's basically like, what is the 1% of nourishment that you can give yourself? Or what's that 1% of whatever it is that is like the task at hand? And instead of, for instance, someone who is in this situation and absolutely needs to go to work, and like, to be able to be like, oh, well, like, no, I'm not going to work. Like, I'm just gonna stay home and rest. And um, that's like a very like 100% kind of scenario, or a very like high percentage scenario, um, where maybe that 1% of moving away from bodylessness into bodyfulness is, um, let me think of a really like locking the door, like you're a mother and you lock the door, um, when you go to the bathroom so the kids don't come in and bother you. Or maybe it's like a bath after work, with Epsom salts. Um, yeah, so like that's one thing that I think of is like, for people who are in this situation, who are like seeking a way to find more bodyfulness within this scenario and disengage from the bodylessness. Um, Definitely like that 1% can't like it can make a big difference over a period of time. Like never underestimate the small shifts. And also I feel like it brings like this tone of compassion of like and like acceptance for like the reality as it is, but also like and compassion for the situation, but also like where can we make a small shift and like not allowing it us to be fully disempowered in this scenario and like just be like victims to this work collapse. And um yeah, I think like another thing is that like, maybe for some people, and like I know beings like this where it's like even just a little bit of pain, it's like they're so used to ignoring the cramps, it's like they don't want to feel it at all. So then they just always take ibuprofen anytime that the cramps come. And so I feel like another way of disengaging from bodilessness and moving more into bodyfulness within like this, that reality is like maybe really just taking the ibuprofen or whatever like form of pain relief that one uses, like only taking it when absolutely necessary. And if there like is space and time to stop and like feel the pain, to really like allow the space to feel the pain, to ask, okay, what are you telling me? I really deeply believe that when one's womb cramps, that there's like a message within that the body is, that's information. And on many levels, if we can attune to the voice of the womb. And so yeah, like rather like giving space to really feel that if there's time, um or also just taking the pain relief when it like absolutely is necessary, like okay, I absolutely need to get to work and I absolutely cannot. But like, if it's like okay, like this kind of sucks, but like I'm not going to take the ibuprofen, I'm just going to go to work and I'm going to kind of be in this slight pain, but at least I'm not like ignoring and suppressing the voice of my womb. So I feel like, yeah, that could be another shift towards bodyfulness within this scenario. Um, and yeah, I guess like one last thing I'll touch on is like, yeah, like the book's like speaking on this like alteration between work, rest, and play. And then, it describes like that overwork as like work collapse. And I feel like this, when we can find the balance between work, rest, and play, or I'll speak from my own experience, but like when I can find the balance between work, rest, and play that also is in harmony with the rhythm of my womb and the earth, that my I feel better the whole month. I like, and my bleed just generally aren't like intense or like any kind of like symptoms from my menstrual cycle that I receive are like alleviated more when I'm living in that balance. But then when I do move into this overwork and I'm overloaded, I've got all these things that I'm doing and I'm not making time for rest and I'm not really like putting in the space to fully live in harmony with the rhythm of my womb. I yeah, the symptoms of my menstrual cycle, like PMS and like cramps and um, even like pain during my ovulation, like these are much more common when I'm like in this overworking, imbalanced state. And like another thing with this is if I'm bleeding, if I'm like in a work collapse, overwork kind of sequence, and I am start my bleed and I move through the days that I'm bleeding with this tempo, ignoring my bleed and the rest that my body is asking for, um, it will influence me the rest of my cycle. And basically, like, even during times where generally there's a pattern where I have energy and I'm like more creative and more outward, like during that time, I'm exhausted and I'm already super burnt out. And so it seems like if I don't get that rest while I'm bleeding, I don't have as much energy throughout the rest of the cycle. And this is kind of like the other thing to like ignoring the cramps, ignoring our bleeds or one's bleed. It's like it's influencing more than just those days. Like the impact, one may not like realize until they start intentionally and consciously working with this and like looking for those patterns and like giving themselves the chance to rest on their bleed. Um, and like yeah, seeing the patterns that unfold with that, it's like it really does make such a difference. And for me and for many people that I've spoken to at the Red School, and um yeah, I feel it's really important, and I feel that there's um one thing that I aspire to see more of is the infraradian rhythm really woven into the rhythm of society. And I think it's important also to just acknowledge that, like, not everyone may relate with that rhythm, um, like, as much as those who have the experience of a menstrual cycle. Um, but there's a lot of wisdom in that rhythm. Um, and yeah, I believe that society would benefit from bringing harmony between those two rhythms. Um, yeah, and with that, I feel complete. Thank you so much. I hope that you have a good day.